So you know how everyone's always complaining that Starfield has nothing but loading screens, but then they praise Cyberpunk 2077 for being an open, seamless world with no loading screens? I feel like that's an absolutely disingenuous lie, because here's a loading screen, everybody. We're about to do a loading screen on this game. We're going to go to this building right here. That's a loading screen, Cyberpunk 2077. Same amount of time. This is a loading screen. Did you see that? Just hang on, I want to make sure that you all got that. That's a loading screen, right? It's not some sort of mythical thing. It's not some sort of dream. This is a loading screen. It's about the same amount of time on my Xbox Series X as it is for Starfield loading screens. And don't worry, because we're going to be diving into Starfield here in a few minutes to talk about this a little bit in greater detail. But there's one type of loading screen in Cyberpunk 2077. I'm going to show you another type of loading screen in here, which will commonly pop up anytime that you want to go to sleep. Hang on, just wait for it. Wait for it. Loading screen. Oh my, what's that? It doesn't have a loading screen. That's a loading screen, everybody. Elevators are another type of loading screen. Now, in Cyberpunk 2077, not all elevators are loading screen style elevators. Any type of elevator where you can see, I think there's one right around the corner here. I always forget. If you can see the exterior,
your latest local news.
Like see here, this one's not going to have a loading screen.
HQ disaster is fast approaching.
But if you can find the ones that are enclosed and you can't see anything out, that's a loading screen. Anytime you get to the end of a quest and it'll be something like wait for that person here, it'll say something like sometime later. That's a loading screen. This game has plenty of loading screens. Not to mention, oh, you want to go do crafting? You got to go through a menu screen. Let's go through it here. We got to go over to the crafting screen, and we got to go into an actual menu. We have to go into something that's not part of the game. That's not so different than Starfield. So I have Starfield loaded up. We're gonna go ahead and switch over now, so you can see this, because it's the same thing here. We have probably, I would argue, twice as many loading screens in Starfield in comparison to Cyberpunk 2077, but it is an absolute lie that Cyberpunk 2077 doesn't have loading screens. It's this open, seamless world. It is an open, seamless city, but there are loading screens, absolutely, and there's creative ways that they do loading of resources, which we've talked about in other episodes, like looking at God of War, the Jedi Fallen Order games, when you walk into a corridor and you get really narrow and your character is shimmying along and the only thing you see around you are the walls. That's the textures. Everything's loading in the scene beyond you. And it's the same thing when you take an elevator in Cyberpunk. If you can't see the exterior, there's generally a loading thing happening. So here, if I want to go out here, to my ship, there's a loading screen. We can go straight to the cockpit. Here's a loading screen. I'm on the Series X, as you can see. It's a very quick loading screen, couple of seconds, not that big of a deal. Let's say that I want to go back to the lodge, perhaps. Let's go to here. I don't have a quest, actually, but let's go back to my star map and go out here. Menus, same thing that exists in Cyberpunk 2077. I got to go through a lot of menus. If I want to fast travel, I got to go find a fast travel waypoint. I can't just travel from anywhere like I can in this game. But let's go back to hang on, where am I at? I'm in the system. I need to pay attention to where I'm at and stop herping and derping. What I wanted to do is go to Jemathon, and we're going to go to the lodge. Here's a loading screen for fast travel, no different than Cyberpunk 2077's loading screens for fast travel. Now, the main difference here is that when you start talking about the way they've done cities, everything's broken into districts, and all those districts are their own little scene that have to be loaded into. And that's why we say Starfield has about twice as many loading screens, I would estimate. I don't know the actual number. I'm saying based on my play experience. In Cyberpunk 2077 coming into a building like this probably would not provoke a um, a loading screen. In some cases it might, but most of them they're just buildings you go into and you're good to go. But like if I want to go crafting here, I got to do the same thing. I can't just craft items. I actually have to go to a menu. And the difference here is that instead of going straight to a menu, like you do in Cyberpunk 2077 on your hotbar, on your UI, you're doing it here from a workbench. But you're hitting a button and you're bringing up a menu in order to craft something. Same process. It's literally no different than going over here and we're gonna load this again really quick. And opening up the crafting from my inventory. We're still clicking the buttons a couple of times. Let's go ahead and say I want to craft something. I hit that button once. I go over here. Boom. I hit a button twice. And now I'm in my crafting menu and I can go to craft or upgrades, right? So same process between these two games. The big difference here is that if I were to look in that direction and go out the door and run in that direction, I can keep going and 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 going. And because Night City is the whole game, and they've done it in such a way that the assets load differently, they're streaming loading. We don't need a lot of loading screens. Now, could they have done that with Starfield? Possibly, but not with all of the AI stuff and all of the procedural generation stuff that they have going on behind the scenes for the planet generation and everything else. There's just too much overhead for the way they've done things. It has nothing to do with the engine, by the way. That has nothing to do with the engine. People who tell you that it's the engine is the reason why they can't do seamless gameplay, that's just not true. Similarly, if we wanted to take a look at Baldur's Gate, which I don't have loaded up right now because that's on the PC and not the Xbox. Let's go back over to Starfield here real quick. Starfield is less noisy. Baldur's Gate 3 has loading screens as well. Every single time you want to fast travel to your camp, there is a loading screen. Anytime you want to fast travel from your camp to a destination, there is a loading screen. Trying to go to another district, there is a loading screen. There are loading screens in every single game you play, bar none. It's just how the companies present that to you, the player. Some games have it to where you have a lot of loading screens, like Starfield. Others do it like the God of War method, where they put you into a narrow chamber where you don't see anything around you but like walls or a rock chamber, and it's loading everything as you come out through the corridor. And then other games like Cyberpunk will do things like they'll have the assets being loaded when you're doing the quick travel. But every game out there uses loading screens, and I wanted to come out here and talk about this because I've been seeing a lot of people just trash Starfield for not being as good as Cyberpunk when it comes to the technology and how it's the engine. It's the engine. It has nothing to do with the engine. It's just the way that they designed their game to have these sectioned off zones, if you want to call them, or scenes, as we would call them in like Unity. But every game does it differently. Even World of Warcraft, as great as that game is, which has an open world, much like what they're doing with Cyberpunk 2077, has loading screens. Star Wars: The Old Republic, big planets and everything else, but still has loading screens when you're flying on and off planets. When you're traveling to other destinations. Lord of the Rings Online, which is another great, online seamless world, still has loading screens for dungeons and certain districts every time you fast travel and you're doing that loading screen. I just think that it's important, if we're going to talk about loading screens, to be honest about it and be willing to admit that yes, Cyberpunk 2077 does have loading screens. It does. Are there as many as Starfield? No. I think that the way they've chosen to optimize their game within the Red Engine that they've used for that game, obviously they're doing things a lot differently than the way Starfield is doing theirs. And Bethesda is, for better or for worse, still using their system that they've used for years and years and years. Now, I will say this, because I watched a really funny video that Asmongold reacted to. I think it was on TikTok a couple nights ago, where he was somebody put together a montage of loading screens. They said if Cyberpunk 2077 was developed by Bethesda, I think is the name of the video, and it basically showed like every time you went to an elevator, there was a loading screen. Every time you wanted to enter a building, loading screen. Every time you wanted to enter a bar or a cantina or a shop merchant, loading screen. Because they do use a lot of loading screens in Starfield, and honestly, it doesn't bother me because I'm on a Series X, so the loading screens are fast, but they do take you out of it. And I will say that Bethesda is going to have to change that design philosophy for the next game that they do, whether it's Elder Scrolls 6 or whatever is going to be the next one coming in the pipeline. They're going to have to get better at optimizing their games for having huge. I'm so sorry, I'm still under the weather. Having huge open zones and open world scenarios where there's fewer loading screens, because they got shredded with Starfield, which I don't think is quite fair given the fact that, as we've showed in this video, there are a lot of loading screens in Cyberpunk 2077. It's just that because the bulk of the game doesn't have them when you're just driving around and going from one side of the city to the other, there's no loading screens there. But you still have fast travel loading screens. You're still having to bring up menus when you want to do crafting. It's not this, seamless thing where there's no screens ever and no loading screens ever. That's just not true. So it's a conversation. Hopefully we can have a civil one down in the comments below. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. And of course, stay tuned, because we are streaming every single day and playing lots of different games, along with Starfield and Cyberpunk and Baldur's Gate 3 and Rogue Trader and all sorts of other fun stuff. So see you in the next one, everybody. Stay safe.